Welcome, everyone, to the Mona Charan Show. I'm delighted to welcome today David Bier, who is the Director of Immigration Studies at the CATO Institute. And I am so glad, David, that you could come on because I want to try to get our arms around so many of the stories that we're reading about what's happening in immigration right now. As we are taping this, the president and Kristi Noem and others have gone to a place they're calling Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. Trump has since made noises about having such facilities all over the country. He is saying, as usual, things like, I say as usual because, he spews so many outrageous and horrifying things on a daily basis, and it's impossible to keep up with them all. But just for today, he's talking about deporting naturalized Americans and even American citizens. He specifically said people who were born in the United States. So you had a recent piece which caught my eye about the nature of the people that ICE is detaining right now. Supposedly, Trump had told us it was going to be the worst of the worst. It was going to be criminals. What's really happening?
What ICE is trying to do is arrest and deport as many people as it possibly can. ICE officers are subject to quotas, so they are supposed to be arresting as an entire organization across the federal government. About 3,000 people per day. They're not reaching that goal that the White House has arbitrarily set for them. So basically what this means is that from the individual officer's perspective, the most important goal is to increase the number of arrests. It's quantity over quality. And we're seeing that reflected in the data on who is actually being arrested. If you look at what has happened really in the last few weeks, we've seen this dramatic increase in the number of arrests that occurred overall, but particularly among the demographic that do not have any criminal convictions in the United States. So in June, over 70% of the people who were arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement had no criminal convictions. And if you look at the tactics that ICE is deploying to get these arrest numbers so high, it's basically by going out on the streets, going into businesses, barging into Home Depots or onto farms and demanding to see the citizenship papers of everyone they encounter. And Border Patrol is assisting them in this effort. So if you look at many of the scenes in Los Angeles, it's often Border Patrol who's actually stopping people in the interior of the United States, demanding to see, in one video, it was, what hospital were you born at? I mean, these are the types of questions that are being posed to American citizens really every day now in cities across the United States, not just Los Angeles, where Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement are trying to increase these number of arrests to meet the arbitrary goals of the White House. If you look at, not just, getting beyond just the idea of a conviction versus not, there are a lot of crimes in the United States, as you know. Only about 5 to 6% of the people arrested in June had a violent criminal conviction. And those are the people who invariably are highlighted at every Department of Homeland Security press conference, every tweet that I see. It's highlighting these exceptions to the rule, while the vast majority of the people that they're targeting are not violent, have never been convicted of anything at all, but certainly are not the violent criminals you hear so much about. So really what we're seeing is a lot of profiling that is happening in immigrant communities in Los Angeles and elsewhere, leading to arrests of people who are not criminals, do not have violent histories. And that is leading to an enormous increase in the population of people who are being detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And many of the facilities are so overcrowded now, there's nowhere to put them. And that leads to, the alligator Alcatraz being opened.
Yeah, so I'd like to get into the conditions in which people are being held. But first, let's dig in a little bit more into the numbers here in terms of the criminality of the people who are being rounded up. So you said about 5% have criminal convictions. Do you know how many have had criminal charges for violent offenses?
So about half the population have a criminal conviction or a criminal charge. This is a little bit, I find this a little bit misleading with the department relying on this stuff, because they can charge someone with crossing the border illegally. Or
that's the next question. Like, what qualifies as a crime?
Anyone who's crossed the border illegally has committed a crime, and that's kind of the common response whenever I point this out. But the whole purpose here, the whole claim, is that this is about public safety. It's about protecting us from these horrible people who came into our country, and so we need to crack down. It's, the idea that, we need to be prosecuting people for illegally entering the country doesn't sound good, which is why they don't emphasize those offenses. They emphasize the violent crimes, the people who defrauded someone or did something where there's an actual victim. And so I think that's the heart of their case is about this.
This is from the piece that you published. You write, most convictions, 53%, fell into three main categories: immigration offenses, traffic offenses, or nonviolent vice crimes. So a nonviolent vice crime would be what? What kind of thing would that be?
Prostitution, mainly drugs, drug possession, drug paraphernalia. This kind of thing. So not people who are raping anyone or murdering anyone, these things that get highlighted. Those are the main group. And the largest single offense category are those immigration offenses, obviously. Easy to prosecute people for crossing the border illegally if they're in the country illegally.
Let's talk also about the way these roundups are happening, because this is something that we have not seen in the past. I mean, part of the way our open and fair justice system and police system tends to work is people in authority wear a badge. It has a number. Their name is visible. Their face is visible. And they say they're arresting you under authority of the government. And what we see now is people who are masked, who are not showing ID, and who are bundling people off the streets. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, into unmarked vehicles is one thing you left off there, or maybe I missed it. So people with plain clothes, no badges, no identification, masks, arresting people or grabbing them and putting them in unmarked vehicles. To many people on the street, it looks like a kidnapping. It doesn't look like law enforcement operation. This is something that, I've seen people be arrested before. I've never seen anyone be arrested in the manner that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is carrying out these arrests. Of course, ICE says we're doing this to protect our officers. This is not just untrue, it is backwards. It actually results in more threats, more assaults on officers when the public does not know who they're interacting with. If I know you're a law enforcement officer, I'm much less likely to assault you, to fight back, or, if you try to grab me, I'm not going to swing at you. If it's just a random person wearing jeans and a t-shirt and they grab me on the street, yes, I'm going to shove them off of me. That's the natural inclination of anyone in that situation, would be to do that. And then you have onlookers also inclined to do the same thing. And so it is really reprehensible that they're selling this as protecting the officers. It's not protecting the officers. It's not protecting the public. It's endangering both by not creating clarity about who is actually making these arrests. The other aspect to this whole secrecy with respect to arrests is that you also have people who can now pretend that they are Immigration and Customs Enforcement and they're here to arrest or detain you, and actually they're sexual predators, they're thieves, they're other people who, get a kick out of
terrorizing people.
Yeah, they don't like their neighbors and they want to just terrorize them into leaving. This is what is happening. It's already been documented, but we only know a tiny sliver of what is happening out there in terms of people impersonating these ICE officers, because we only catch, a small percentage of those impersonators. Especially
when the victims are going to be very unlikely to want to come forward and make a complaint for fear of being deported or otherwise harassed and becoming, raising their profile. So they're not going to complain. By the way, Tom Homan claims that this is because their ICE officers have been doxed. What do you make of that?
I don't even understand the argument. Every NYPD officer, by that definition, has been doxed. I mean, you can look up the profile of public officials, judges. I mean, these are people who are acting on our behalf as citizens of this country. They are supposed to represent us and act on our behalf. We are entitled to know who they are, who is the person who's acting on our behalf. And of course, anyone who's being detained has the right to know under what authority, am I being detained.
This massive assault on civil liberties that we are watching in real time was put into motion by basically a story that Trump started to tell in 2015, and that has become sort of the mantra of the MAGA movement, which is that we have been invaded by this army of criminals who are terrorizing Americans and don't deserve to be here, and that we are under siege from this influx of criminal immigrants. Now, one might say, it's funny because only 5% of the people that you're holding have criminal records, violent criminals. Maybe that wasn't true. Or is it that they're just really bad at finding them? Or explain this, please.
You're absolutely right. They want to make it into a military operation. This is why we, sometimes see them in fatigues. They have the National Guard come in, all these types of things that they're doing to enhance the fear and, emotions about security. They claim it's an invasion. Obviously, it's not an invasion in the constitutional sense. We can use whatever euphemism we want to describe something we don't like. They don't like immigration, so immigration is an invasion. We even now have legal invaders, the people who've come into the country legally as students or parolees or refugees. They're invaders. Trump called them, the Trojan horse invasion. So, this is how they describe and talk about immigration. It's hyperbole at best. It's, a lie at worst.
Well, the older I get, the more I find myself wanting to be more intentional about the way I live, eat, and take care of my body. The old adage, you are what you eat, rings very true to all of us in this day and age. And I'm always looking for an on-the-go protein snack that satisfies me without being full of junk. And now I found one that helps me live intentionally. Mosh Bars. You may have heard about Mosh Bars on Shark Tank. They were founded by Maria Shriver and her son, Patrick Schwarzenegger, with a simple mission to create a conversation about brain health through food education and research. Maria's father suffered from Alzheimer's, and since then, she and Patrick have dedicated themselves to finding ways to help other families dealing with this debilitating disease. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and nutritionists to go beyond your average protein bar. Each Mosh Bar is made with ingredients that support brain health, like ashwagandha, lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s, plus a game-changing, brain-boosting ingredient you won't find in any other bar. Mosh is the first and only food brand boosted with Cognizin, a premium nootropic that surprised the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. Mosh Bars also taste great and come in 9 mouth-watering flavors, including 3 new plant-based flavors: chocolate chip cookie, hazelnut chocolate chip, and peanut chocolate chip. But here's the best part to make you feel good. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. Why gender-based? Well, 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women. Mosh is working closely to close the gap between women and men's health research. A healthy diet is essential, and I have to tell you that I am really a devotee of fresh fruits and vegetables, plant-based eating. I do eat meat, but I try to limit it. I stay away from highly processed foods. I really believe in this, and I think it does help with one's overall health. Mosh Bars are delicious. They're also really wonderful to eat even as dessert. So if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and your brain, Mosh Bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/Mona to save 20% off, plus free shipping on the bestsellers trial pack or the new plant-based trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the bestsellers trial pack or the plant-based trial pack at moshlife.com. That's MOSHLIFE.com/Mona. Thank you, Mosh, for sponsoring this podcast. Talk about the levels of crime committed by immigrants versus native-born Americans.
So, what we've done, we've looked at this in a number of different ways. In terms of, what we get from the Census Bureau is the survey of who is in our nation's prisons. This is stuff that's coming from the administrator of the prison. And so when we look at that data, we can say that illegal immigrants are about half as likely to be incarcerated in prisons in the United States or other detention facilities. That actually includes the people who are being imprisoned specifically because they are here illegally. And legal immigrants, it's even more extreme, 70% below the rate for the U.S. born population. We looked at conviction rates and arrest rates for the only state that has those records in Texas, specifically for homicide because the most investigation is done there. And again, illegal immigrants and legal immigrants, 26 to 30% less likely to be arrested and convicted of homicide in the state of Texas. We have data from Georgia that shows the same thing just for the illegal immigrant population. And nationwide, the idea that they're importing crime and that, the immigrant communities are just being destroyed is just not borne out by any data set that we have looked at in order to evaluate this claim. According to the Department of Homeland Security, they have about 450,000 people with a criminal conviction who are, eligible for removal from the United States. That is somewhere around 3% of the unauthorized or removable population of non-citizens in the United States. The average American is likely to have at least one conviction. About 1 in 5 Americans have at least one criminal conviction of some kind. That's a staggering number. but it goes to show how much less crime prone this population. They're not trying to go out and commit crimes and take over America. One of the things that J.D. Vance likes to talk about is how immigration increases home values. And he goes on and on. It's making home values unaffordable and all this stuff. But it cuts completely against his story about crime. If they're coming in and they're destroying our neighborhoods, how are they making our housing more valuable, our communities? Right. I mean, it's a reflection of the fact that the community is better with them in there. More people want to live there as a result of their presence in the United States.
And everybody knows that over the last 30 years, we have had a huge increase in immigration. We've also had a dramatic drop in crime. Yeah. So, I mean, there you go. I mean, if this influx of immigrants was supposedly creating this terrible crime wave, it's not showing up in the data. It's fake.
It's the easiest thing in the world, right? To pick out anecdotes, to pick out a specific person and turn this whole issue into a referendum on one singular event, as if that represents the population as a whole. And so, the argument is if we just deport everyone, then, there won't be any crimes anymore, which is fundamentally the wrong way to look at it. We look at the rate when we want to evaluate whether something is becoming more threatening or less threatening. You don't say, I'm only going to avoid this city because they have a higher absolute number, even if the rate in another city is 5 times that rate. So you look at the crime rate when evaluating whether or not a population is threatening or not.
I can imagine arguments against large amounts of immigration that are not based on falsehood. I want to make that clear. You can make good faith arguments, and some people do, that it's hard to assimilate huge numbers of immigrants, and I happen to think we're very good at assimilation in this country. But I could see somebody saying, well, you need to take a pause every now and then, digest the people you've already admitted, and then, you can then gradually increase it again. Okay, I could see that kind of argument. But this kind of argument that is based completely on lies about immigrants themselves is completely illegitimate. Now, let's talk about where they are putting. So Stephen Miller issues a ukaz from the White House saying, from now on, forget trying to find criminals. Obviously, they couldn't find them. So now we're just going to go to Home Depot. We're going to go to farms. We're going to go to, and Trump, again, who knows what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. But the most recent thing that I've seen is that now he's saying, well, certain businesses are going to be exempt again. He keeps changing the story about who's going to be subject to these deportations and who isn't, and maybe the farmers won't, and who knows. But anyway, they have adopted this let's just find anybody we can who's not here legally and grab them. And so let me give you just a few examples. This is not, these are anecdotes, but these are real people that this has happened to in the last few days. So they deported a Florida pastor's wife who had been here for 30 years. They grabbed an Army sergeant's wife and separated her from her husband and 10-month-old son and deported her to Honduras. I believe she was still nursing that baby. They have deported children who are still undergoing cancer treatment. They grabbed and are holding in detention a father who's a gardener. He's the father of 3 sons who are all Marines. They are keeping people in unbelievably inhumane conditions. So let's talk about that a little bit. Hard to believe that this is happening in a first world country under the eyes of of all of us. But describe for us some of the conditions that these people are being kept in.
Yeah, so the Congress has appropriated about 41,000 detention beds or money for detaining immigrants in the United States. And the Immigration and Customs Enforcement is holding almost 60,000 people now. And so the math doesn't add up. They're detaining people and just jamming them into cells in conditions that are totally inhumane. There's not enough people to pay attention to these individuals with medical conditions. You know, there was a Cuban man who'd been in the country for over almost 50 years, and he was elderly, and he died in ICE custody. We don't know what culpability ICE has in that scenario, but certainly there are not enough people to pay attention to all the people that they are detaining. I mean, I don't know if you've been to a hospital in the United States. It's hard to even get someone's attention when you're actually at a hospital, let alone in a detention facility that's designed to deport you and get rid of you from the country. And so we have over a dozen people who've already died in detention. This is more than we already saw last year. You know, it's only going to get worse as conditions continue to deteriorate. Members of Congress are trying to conduct oversight over the situation and get into these facilities, which the law entitles them to. The law guarantees any member of Congress the right to show up at any facility and look at these conditions for oversight purposes. And they're repeatedly flouting that law, blocking them. They even arrested one of them after they entered the facility. And so what we're seeing is, you know, people being held without access to showers, medicine,
toilets,
even food and water, toilets. Right.
This is from the New York Times. Some immigrants have gone a week or more without showers. Others sleep pressed tightly together on bare floors. Medications for diabetes, high blood pressure, and other chronic health problems are often going unprovided. In New York and Los Angeles, people have been held for days in cramped rooms designed for brief processing, not prolonged confinement. And there was one toilet for 35 to 40 men.
Yeah. I mean, this is what it means when you're over capacity. Like, this is, you know, we can talk about the numbers and how, you know, but when you are actually jamming that many people into a facility that's not designed for that purpose, yes, you have people sleeping on floors. You have people sleeping basically in the dark. There's no way for them to exercise or move. I mean, this is the conditions that people are being detained in.
It's worse than any prison that holds hardened criminals in this country.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we give better conditions to murderers than we're giving to the people who are we're trying to remove from the United States for, you know, whatever reason. And so, yes, it's this is central to the Stephen Miller. This is not an accident. This isn't like, oh, we just don't have enough money. No, they want to make the conditions so lousy. The Stephen Miller has said this. We want to make people give up and choose to leave the country because they're being imprisoned. And this is effectively a way to force people who have a way to stay in the United States. They might be eligible for asylum. They might be eligible for relief. Maybe they have even a U.S. citizen spouse or a child who could sponsor them for a green card. And the whole purpose of this is force people to give up and leave because we don't want them here. We want them to give up on the rights the law affords them.
Do you think they will branch out to trying to deport naturalized Americans and even American citizens in certain circumstances?
Well, of course, there's no question about this. The Birthright citizenship case is just kind of a test run of this idea that they're going to be able to limit the number of people who have citizenship. The whole goal of the immigration policy, it has nothing to do with people who are violating the law. They're deporting people who entered the country legally and have legal status. They're just stripping them and deporting them. It has nothing to do with even non-citizens. You know, because of this birthright citizenship order, we're going to be ordering U.S.-born citizens, children removed from the United States who never violated any law in this country. So what is this really about? It's about limiting the rights of as many people as possible in the United States to challenge the president. And so if you can't defend yourself with your birth certificate anymore, then your citizenship has been deprived and devalued in a very significant way. And so we're going after non-citizens for their speech explicitly, people who are dissidents, who are opposed to foreign policy of this administration. We can debate all the substance of it. It has nothing to do with the substance.
No, it doesn't.
They're going after people for their speech, explicitly for writing op-eds and other things. So
yes.
All I have to do, I post on social media, I'm against what the Trump administration is doing on foreign policy. I get a knock on the door. They demand to see my citizenship papers. I can't use my birth certificate anymore because there's no birthright citizenship. So at that point, they can detain me because I don't have any proof that I'm in the country legally. I have no proof that I'm a citizen. So they can detain. This is the world. This is the country that's actually being created right now through the executive orders of this president. And then the last part of it is no due process on removal. So I can grab you, arrest you, and then there's no hearing. It's just whatever the ICE agent says goes, and I'm on the plane and I'm flying to wherever, a foreign prison, because I supported terrorists who oppose this government.
Let's talk a little more about this whole birthright citizenship issue. So the Supreme Court got the case, and for reasons known best to them, they chose to make it about nationwide injunctions. They could have taken up the whole nationwide injunction issue in the Biden years, but they didn't. But now when this critical issue is before them, and they could have made it about the substance of the birthright citizenship, they sidestepped it and did this thing with injunctions. So, okay, but for now, the issue of birthright citizenship remains to be resolved. There will be more cases. This time they will be brought through a slightly more cumbersome method, like certifying a class action or something. Okay, so then it'll go back up to the Supreme Court. I had believed that it was a slam dunk, that they would say, this is in the 14th Amendment, you can't change it. Now I'm not so sure. We'll see. But talk to us a little bit more about what that would mean. If the birthright, if you are no longer automatically a citizen because you were born here, how do you prove your citizenship? What good is your birth certificate or your, family having been here for 3 generations or 20 or whatever?
Yeah, this is core to the whole project, undermining the rights of citizens, undermining our ability to defend ourselves when the government comes knocking is core to the whole really Republican Party project at this point. And when it comes to birthright citizenship, look, the way you prove your citizenship you would have to then prove your parents
that your parents were here legally
in the United States, that they were a citizen. We don't know how far down the rabbit hole you're going to go with that, right? Because their citizenship depends. So they've said, well, we're not going to go retroactively, and it's only going to be for new children. So, you don't really need to worry. And I just think that is a load of nonsense. They're completely untrustworthy on this. This is just assurances to appease the people who are, to really appease the courts and make them feel a little bit better about gutting this core constitutional principle that protects all of our rights. And if you look at it, the president has repeatedly said he doesn't think Obama is a citizen. He's repeatedly said that Kamala Harris isn't a citizen. So we know what this is about. This isn't like some secret or conspiracy that I'm uncovering here. He doesn't believe his political opponents are citizens and should be able to challenge him or have free speech rights or have any of the other rights of citizens. And so he's gutting this core constitutional principle to be able to go after whoever he wants. And so it all comes back to power and his ability to exercise power within the United States against people who speak out against him or he opposes for whatever reason. And we see this, again, you brought up the denaturalization thing. Elon Musk best friend, greatest
Yeah.
person in the history of the world. Love the guy, put him in charge of the entire federal government for days and weeks and months. But now all of a sudden we can look into stripping him of his United States citizenship because of the things that he has said. Now, there's an argument that he violated immigration law and he didn't disclose it. And so maybe they'll be able to nail him on those things. But that is an example of how you use the federal government to effectively suppress political opposition. And, we're going to continue to see more instances of it. This is not a one-off. This is core to the whole immigration project right now.
So a lot of people tend to dismiss concerns over process as sort of dull technical matters that don't concern them so much. But as you've described it, and it is obvious that process is everything. Like, if you don't have the right to a hearing and a lawyer and a neutral determination of your status, if these immigrants don't have that right, then what happens when they come for somebody like you, you were born here, right?
I was, yes.
Okay, so ICE comes and arrests David Bier, and you say, well, but I was born here and I am an American, and they say, yeah, well, that's nice, but you're getting on a plane and going to El Salvador, because there's no process, there's no judge, there's no hearing, and that is what could happen without process.
Yeah, and it's not even like it's, this is so far afield from what they're already trying to do when it comes to legal immigrants in this country. If you look at, we have documented over 50 individuals who are currently being imprisoned in El Salvador, Venezuelans, currently imprisoned in El Salvador, who came to the country legally, never violated any immigration laws, including 4 refugees, someone who entered on a tourist visa. These people were detained by ICE or by Customs and Border Protection, loaded onto planes, and deported from the United States without any due process to a foreign prison where U.S. taxpayers are paying to imprison them indefinitely. It's actually worse than anything that you could think of in terms of, well, let's just say the president gets to assign prison sentences to people he doesn't like. It's actually worse than that because they have no end date. Yeah, as long as the Republican Party is in power in the White House, these people are never getting out because we know so many of them aren't criminals. They aren't gang members. These are people who, are going to expose just how terrible it is to not have due process and just allow the president just to, on a whim, send someone to another country, or including to a prison.
Looking forward, what do you recommend to our viewers and listeners that they do about this? Who should they call? What should ordinary people who are very alarmed do?
Well, number one, educate yourself about your rights. You should understand what constitutes proof of citizenship. Your driver's license is not going to cut it. The birthright citizenship thing obviously throws it all into flux, but
for now,
state IDs, aren't going to cut it. But understand, you have the right to remain silent. Doesn't matter if you're a criminal or not. You should exercise that right. You should not be talking to law enforcement who is trying to get as many arrests as possible. Mm-hmm. They don't really care if you're in the country legally or illegally or a citizen or not.
By the way, if people have a passport, should they be carrying around a copy?
I mean, it's really your personal decision. Obviously, that's going to increase your ability to defend yourself if you are in that situation. For me, I do not want to concede my freedom. I am willing to go to jail, to go to a detention center, to be hassled, to be arrested, to do all of those things. So if you are willing to do those, go through that in order to stand up for our rights, to stand up for our freedoms, I applaud you. You should do it. There was a gentleman who, refused to open his car door, refused to show proof of ID. He was a U.S. citizen. They were saying, you meet the description of somebody.
I know.
I mean, basically just blatant profiling.
Yeah.
And, ultimately he was able to, they dragged him out and they arrested him. And then he proved that he was a citizen. But he showed what they're doing. What they are doing on a daily basis is racial profiling and arresting people without probable cause and harassing people. So I do think there's some value in us as citizens standing up for our rights and refusing to back down from an administration who wants to violate them. So it is a personal choice. Like, some people are going to say, I just want to go on my day and defend myself as quickly as I can. Other people, will feel more comfortable about defending themselves. There are people who are really threatened. It's dangerous to be in one of these facilities.
If you've got type 1 diabetes or a heart condition or something like that, you're well advised to carry your passport or a copy of it, right?
So you need to take into account your personal situation when making these types of assessments.
Right. And if you're Hispanic, I mean, if you're a person of color, you're more likely to be hassled and arrested. So you would have a higher risk. And that is something people might want to take into account, especially if they have like a medical condition. But then, so that's one thing. And I'm with you in terms of, just saying, damn you, I refuse to carry a copy of my passport. This is America. I don't have to do that. Damn you. I agree. But what about then not just personal safety, but what about activism? What else should people be doing?
So, I mean, the number one threat right now, of course, is the congressional action on the reconciliation bill. I mean, once this law, passes, it is going to change the nature of enforcement in a way that we've never seen in American history. We are going to have law enforcement conducting operations in every city, in every town across the United States in ways that you cannot describe an ICE raid on a Home Depot or in a business where they just come in and push everyone against the wall and demand to see your papers. Once that starts happening in more and more places, when this bill passes, there will be outrage that you would not believe. People don't understand these bystander stories about people who are, reacting to seeing an ICE raid by, again, people in masks, people in plain clothes. You don't even know who they are or what authority they're asserting to do these things to you. This is coming to every neighborhood in America after this bill passes, because it effectively gives Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol a blank check. I mean, we're talking about multiple decades worth of funding in this bill to just do whatever they want.
It gives them a huge amount of money. I know that. Does it also change the legal status of these roundups?
Yeah, it's just the money, right? I mean, as long as you have this unbelievable amount of funds.
Yeah.
And of course, like, the courts can't do anything. They've been completely neutered, particularly when it comes to this issue of racial profiling, what they're doing at work sites and Home Depots. I mean, you basically cannot do anything. And a specific individual might be able to defend their rights and, fight off an arrest because they're a citizen. But, in terms of actually being able to stop ICE from going from place to place and just rounding people up and demanding to see their papers, that is going to happen because there's really no other way for them to make arrests. They've maxed out in terms of trying to identify people through, state and local arrests. That is off the table. So the only way to increase at the margin now is to do more racial profiling. And that is what we'll see on display everywhere once this bill becomes law and ICE becomes the largest interior law enforcement agency in America.
I think they're talking about allocating more money for ICE detention than for the federal prisons.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they hold 150,000 people. Likely under this bill, we're going to be seeing 200 to 250,000 people being detained. Over 80%, my estimate is over 80% of all of the law enforcement money being spent by the federal government in 2028 is going to go to immigration enforcement under this bill. I mean, the priorities are just so wild. And that doesn't even account for the fact that the Stephen Miller has already defunded 80% of the ATF, 25% of the DEA, an untold percentage, thousands of FBI agents who've been reassigned to do immigration enforcement already. So they're already off their jobs policing.
They're not going after criminals. They're going after gardeners and maids and nannies.
And DEA agent, the head of the DEA says, our agents don't know how to do immigration enforcement. We're learning to do it on the job. I mean, this is literally what's happening already. When this bill passes, they're going to be pulling random people off the street to fill these ICE positions funded under this bill. I mean, ICE is going to have the highest wage rate of any law enforcement agency. So it's going to be a high priority job, massive $10,000 bonuses coming in every year for these agents to do these types of raids. So it's going to be a highly sought after position.
And the kinds of people who are going to be attracted to those jobs, they're not going to be the kind of people that you want in law enforcement, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, we saw this, we actually saw this, unfortunately, with the Border Patrol, when there was a doubling of the Border Patrol from 2005 to 2009. There's this huge surge of people. They hired basically all these fired police officers, and then they had to fire so many of them for violating people's rights or being corrupt or engaging in smuggling. So we're going to see all those things happen under this bill as they ramp up and try to hire people as rapidly as possible off the street. We know one of the people working in the detention facilities for ICE was a former police officer who was fired for lying and for framing someone. That person then gave testimony against an immigrant who ultimately ended up in El Salvador. So we know there are lots of corrupt and former police officers out there to be picked up and plugged into an agenda that doesn't care about the rule of law or the Constitution.
And one thing you can say they have succeeded in is they have gotten the message out that this is no place that you would want to come to. We are going to be facing a huge problem with the labor shortage. Our economy can't function without immigration, and it's going to be painful.
It's the absolutely worst possible time for America to suddenly discover the worst form of nativism in its entire history, because we're not having enough children to support the retirees that we already have. The economy, 100% of the increase in the working age population is already coming from immigrants. And if we get rid of immigration, we're going to basically mean that we're going to have higher costs, less goods and services being produced, and bankrupt Social Security and Medicare even sooner. So there are a lot of economic costs and consequences to this that people aren't thinking about. The congressional budget, for what it's worth, Stephen Miller's out there spreading misinformation about how we're going to save so much money through these deportations. We're going to deport all these people who aren't contributing anything to our country. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the inflow of people under the Biden years will reduce the federal debt by almost $1 trillion over the next decade. And it's increasing year after year as more of these people get jobs. So it is absolutely inaccurate to say that this is going to benefit the United States fiscally or economically if we get rid of all these people. So all they can do is then fall back on these phony lies about crime. And I think that is an important point for people to understand, is that we need these people. It's the only invasion in the history of the United States that has made us wealthier and more prosperous.
All right. I think that's a good note to end on. David Bier, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.